So far what we've looked at are what we could call monadic predicate letters. That's just a fancy way of saying we've looked at stuff that looks like this. I.e. something that has one big letter and something that has one tiny placeholder letter. However, these one-place predicate letters, monadic predicate letters, while they're adequate for ascribing attributes of certain things, for example, of being human to some one individual, they're not good at representing what we can call relations. You can't represent a taller than relation using something that looks like this. You can't represent a further than relation. You can't represent an older than, a sister of. Anything that says that some one being stands in some sort of relation to some other being. It was going to be a dog, but it was going to be a bad looking dog. So here's an even worse looking dog. To some other type of human, some other type of being, or some other type of object even. We're going to need something that's a little bit more complex. So one of the ways that we solve this problem, the problem of relations, is we introduce what we call polyadic predicates. I spell it right, A-D-I-C, yeah. In other words, poly means many. So instead of having something that has one big letter and then a little letter, we're going to have something that has one big letter and then at least two little letters. So for example, let's say that we had something that was OXY. This could stand for X is older than Y. Or even SXY. X is the sister of Y, or a sister of Y. So when we think about arguments, for example, let's say that I told you the following. Let's say I told you that we have this person, Al, and then we had another person, Bob. Then we had a third person, Chris. I could tell you that Al is taller than Bob, and I could tell you that Bob is taller than Chris. We know that if one thing is taller than the other, then it follows that Al should be taller than Chris. We wouldn't be able to symbolize this unless we had polyadic symbols. If we use TXY to symbolize X is taller than Y, then we'll be able to substitute in the values of let A be Al, B be Bob, and C be Chris. Namely, we can say that Al is taller than Bob, that Bob is taller than Chris, and that it follows, therefore, that Al must be taller than Chris as well. What we would need right here is something that looks like the following. For all X, for all Y, and for all Z, if is both the case that T, X, Y, and T, Y, Z, then it follows that T, X, Z. This added premise that has symbolizations that have multiple placeholders is enough to allow us to create more complex, valid arguments. So statements involving relations, they can be rather difficult to symbolize. But a lot of that difficulty can really be removed by working through a series of well-known examples and trying to figure out how these different examples come together to represent relations. So let's go through a few quick examples. These are going to be things that you will just need to practice. No woman is smarter than Eve. So we know that we're going to have category of woman. We have a single person, Eve, and we have a smarter than relation. X is smarter than Y. We also have a no. So there's going to be a few different ways to translate this. I'm going to translate the most forward way. For all of X, if X is a woman, then it's not the case that that X is smarter than Eve. You could also translate it as it's not the case that there exists an X such that X is both a woman and X is smarter than Eve. Both of these are going to be equivalent statements. Let's look at another one. If Adam is taller than Eve, then someone is taller than Eve. Well, what do we have? We have Adam, that's a particular person. We have a taller than relation. We have a particular person, Eve. Someone, that's going to be an existential claim of some sort. Another taller than claim, and then Eve again. So what we would do to translate this one is, if Adam is taller than Eve, so we want to translate that taller than Eve part first. So if Adam is taller than Eve, then there exists some X such that X, in this case we have to remember to add in X as a person, and X is taller than Eve. Let's look at a few more. No one is taller than himself. So what we have is we have no one. So we're talking about a person here. It's understood. Taller than relation. X is taller than Y. In himself, we know that something's going to be self-referential. So we're going to have like an XX, a YY, ZZ, something of that sort. So if we wanted to translate this, what we would do, we would say that for all of X, if X is a person, then it's not the case that X is taller than himself, or herself, or themselves. No one is taller than everyone. So we have a no one claim. Remember, this is an implied person. Taller relation. And everyone's going to be universal. And then the no one, this is probably going to, well, you could translate it as an existential. It's much better to translate it as a universal. And we would translate it as, for all of X, if X is a person, then it's not the case that there exists some Y such that that Y is a person and X is taller than that Y. Let's go on to the next one. Everyone is taller than someone. So we have everyone, X, a taller than relation, TXY, someone, and exists Y, someone that is out there. Then translate. For all of X, if X is a person, then there exists some Y such that Y is a person and X is taller than Y. Let's do one more. Every adult gives. Let's do a present to some child. So every adult, we're talking about all adults. Giving is a triadic relation. X gives. What do they give? They give Y to Z. Then we have a present. We have a Y. And this is going to be what we would call actually a direct object. And then to some child. So that's going to be a CZ. It's going to be an existential Z. And this is called an indirect object. We would say that for all of X, if X is an adult, then there exists some Y such that Y is both a present and there is some Z such that Z is both a child, and X gives Y to that Z. So what I've done here is I've done some very basic introductions to relationals, but let's go ahead and try to figure out some additional elements of relationals that might be handy. So some relations are what we would call symmetric. So, and I'm just saying this because this might be helpful for some folks thinking about this. We have symmetrical relations. For example, being the brother of, or the sister of, or the sibling of. If someone is your sibling, you are also their sibling. Then we have asymmetrical. Being a parent of is asymmetrical. If somebody is a parent of someone else, that person is not in turn the parent of that person. So, for example, if I am the actually this will work. So, for example, for in fraternity and sorority life, you have like bigs and littles. If I am the father or whatever, or the parent to my little, they are not the parent to me. It is a one-way street. And let's see what else there is. So yeah, so that's going to be asymmetrical. And then you have things that are reflexive. And reflexive means that they can bear the relation unto themselves. For example, being self-identical. Something can be self-identical to itself. Identity is a reflexive relation. In contrast, a irreflexive relation is some type of identity that something cannot bear to itself. For example, you can't be larger than yourself, at least not actually physically larger than yourself. Maybe you are mentally larger than yourself, so you're like the TARDIS from Doctor Who. But something cannot actually be larger than it is in fact. And then there are also things called non-reflexive, but we can ignore those. The last thing I would say that might help is think about transitive relations. Transitive relations are things that if A bears R to B and B bears R to C, then it follows that A bears R, and R here stands for relation, to C. Taller than is transitive. However, things can also be intransitive. For example, being the father of is intransitive. If Greg is the father of John and John is the father of Carl, it doesn't follow that Greg is the father of Carl. And there's also like non-transitive things, but we can ignore that. So the reason that I'm introducing these is some of the questions I get sometimes are, how do I know when I need to use just a single letter and a single placeholder versus one that has more than one letter? And the answer is, are you talking about a relation? A relation means that something stands in a relationship towards something else, as opposed to something that can be definitional in and of a thing without reference to any other type of being or any type of thing. So that's kind of the best and the most reductive I can get to it, and then saying practice. Practice these problems and try to figure out how to workshop them to make them understandable for yourself.